Hi, friends. I'm Scott Giles, and welcome to Power Talk, my podcast here on Facebook Live and YouTube. I cover topics related to spirituality, hypno-coaching, and the hypnotic arts and sciences generally. If you want to know more about my work, please check out my website, which I'll tag at the end of this video. Today, I want to talk about a mental tool that you might find helpful in your efforts to take control of your life with the power of your mind. This is the concept of creating an inner meditation chamber. I'll talk about it and some of the ways the concept has been modified to be useful for other purposes. Now, I first encountered this notion when I was in college. The self-help program, then called the Silva Mind Control Method, I think it's still around, routinely would hold lectures on campus of the University of Connecticut, where I received my first 2 degrees. I didn't actually take the training, although I attended some of the informational lectures, but several of my dorm mates did go through the Silva Mind Control training. Now, participants in that training were not supposed to talk to people who had not actually been through the training themselves about that program. However, whoever came up with that rule didn't know what things are like in a freshman dormitory in college, because all of my dorm mates who attended the program promptly spilled the beans and described everything. They held workshops and demonstrations, dumb stuff that college dudes do. I would subsequently read Jose Silva's book, The Silva Mind Control Method, and this technique of the inner meditation chamber is described in that book, and so I know that my dorm mates did teach it to me correctly. Now, the idea is brilliant, but as I would soon learn, it's not even remotely original to Jose Silva, and to be fair, he never claimed that it was. The idea is that in your imagination, you create a room or some space in your mind. You design it carefully, and on the whole, once you've designed it, you leave it alone. There should be a door or some other image that you can imagine as a way of entering this imaginary room. And then in the room, you place some things which are helpful to you in doing various kinds of meditative exercises. For example, there could be a medical table where you might imagine someone reclining on that you wanted to heal. There might be a computer or magic mirror or something you can use to call up information. And you should imagine a couple of assistants who would be there in the room to give you a hand. One of my friends discovered that his assistant was the famous movie star Raquel Welch. And why not? Once you got this thing in your mind, you then use it routinely. You go into meditation and then imagine yourself in your mind entering your inner meditation chamber. If you're trying to remember something that you've forgotten, you might type it into that imaginary computer and wait to see if it sends you a reply from your unconscious mind. If you're worried about a friend who is sick, you might imagine them asleep on the medical table, and you ask your assistant to do some sort of healing work under your direction. It's kind of a fun technique, and I do suggest you give it a try. Now, for most of my professional life, I've usually had a spiritual director. A director is a pastoral professional who has taken special training in the techniques and history of spiritual cultivation. Often a spiritual director is a member of the clergy, but there are many fine directors who are laity, but who have taken comprehensive training at a spiritual direction institute. In the course of my own direction, I would discover that the technique of creating an inner space in your imagination that you can manipulate while in meditation is a very old technique indeed. St. Ignatius Loyola wrote his book, The Spiritual Exercises, in the 16th century, and he suggests something very similar to the inner meditation chamber. Ignatius was a Spaniard, a theologian, and the founder of the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits. He would say that you should place yourself in some locale from the Gospels with all of your senses active. Feel the warmth of the sunlight, smell the dust in the air. And modern teachers of this method often update it so you can place yourself in, the manger of Bethlehem or at the tomb on Easter morning, and so on. Many hypnotists will employ such imagery as well. Sometimes when doing healing work, we'll ask a client to imagine a control room in the body where things in the body can be adjusted. Sometimes we suggest the image of a dial that records pain, and we have our client turn the dial up to imagine the pain intensifying, and because what can be turned up can be turned down, we have the client dial down the pain. Now that's not an inner meditation chamber as such, but it's an inner control room, and some hypnotists actually get quite elaborate in the visualization that they suggest to their client, and you have all sorts of controls that become metaphors for taking control over body processes. One Buddhist friend found it was invaluable to create such an interior place where he could find refuge for peaceful meditation after he was incarcerated overseas after protesting governmental repression. He would imagine himself entering the meditation hall of the monastery where he spent some time as a monk, and he would recall the smell of the incense, the creak of the floorboards, and when he settled in this inner meditation hall, he would be able to meditate for real, even though he was actually in a jail cell. One of my clients, who was a Star Wars fan, would do much the same thing, imagining himself in Darth Vader's spherical meditation chamber aboard the Super Star Destroyer Executor. Now, I'm not sure I would personally want to identify with Darth Vader as a spiritual example, but who am I to judge? Another client of mine who had studied the Hermetic arts like alchemy told me about an astral temple he had created. And as far as I could see, it was an elaboration of this theme. And in this imaginary astral temple, he had an altar, a magic circle, and the 4 instruments that are from the deck of tarot cards that form the suits: the pentacle, the cup, the sword, and the wand. Many hypnotists, as part of their induction pattern, ask a client to begin all trance work by imagining some standard image. For example, a place of safety that they can go to if the trance experience turns out to be too intense. I used to ask all of my clients to start their hypnotic journey by imagining themselves in a mystical meadow, star-shaped and evergreen, and completely and utterly safe. I still use that image occasionally with some clients, although I've updated my techniques these days to something a little more effective, but it did work. These are all variations on the theme of having an imaginary meditation chamber as a starting point for inner work. Once there, you can drift off into mindfulness, into visualizations, regression to past times, do metta meditation, loving kindness meditation, repetition of a mantra, or any other sort of meditative or imaginary journey. And this is way cheaper and easier than trying to set up an actual meditation chamber, which requires space, furniture, props, and some way of keeping small children and pets from messing with it when you're not looking. I've known people who save photographs and graphics of things they have in their inner meditation chamber as a way of keeping the imagery fresh, and they tell me this works quite well. Now, there is a downside to using something like this in that it's a lot like work. Like any other mental construct, it takes some effort to create and then maintain. Although I know from personal experience that over time, it does become second nature and then takes almost no effort at all. There was a time in the 1980s when I was hospitalized for a surgical biopsy that would require an actual abdominal incision. Everyone pretty much thought I was facing a malignancy. Back then, you checked in on the night before surgery. It was a long and scary night for me. But I got through it well because I really spent most of that time, at least the time I was awake, in my inner meditation chamber. And I had enough experience with it that I could keep myself occupied there until sleep came. In my mind, I went to a bookcase where I imagined photo albums and scrapbooks about times earlier in my life where I'd been resilient to harm. Now, no such photos or scrapbooks exist, but in my mind, yes, they did. And I could peruse them in this interior place. And I found that some of those scenes I had actually forgotten until I searched for them. And then I remembered the incidents that actually formed the basis of inner strength at a scary time. Therefore, the inner meditation chamber, regardless of what your religious or spiritual background is a useful tool and one that I would recommend for experimentation. It may or may not be of use to you, but you won't know until you try. Hey, thank you for your time and attention today. I'll be back next week with another talk on a different subject, and I'd like to invite you to join me. It does help me if you'll let others know about my videos, so please like, share, and subscribe. And if I can be of help to you, please feel free to reach out through email, my website, or my Patreon channel. Stay well and stay safe.